So you get more access when the interest rates are low, and then as the interest rates go up, it increases that line of credit because the line of credit is growing by the interest rates.
Right.
Two folks asked, Wade, and this would be tough for you to answer explicitly, I know, but on my, literally just looking at the questions I got, is it better, and this is just your opinion, no one's holding you accountable, just your thoughts, is it better to set the reverse mortgage early? And I know you talked about this in your book too, so both Rick and Rob, who asked this question, read Wade's book, but all right, the question is it better to set the reverse mortgage earlier or wait until you need it? And I know you answer that in the book, but verbalize that if you would here, if you don't mind, Wade.
Yeah, so pre-2017, there was this ability to set up the reverse mortgage for $125 total, and then it was really just a no-brainer to do it. Part of that 2017 rule change that had to redo all the analysis, the upfront cost, it's no longer possible for lenders to credit the increase in the mortgage insurance premium. So you could be looking at $10,000 to $20,000 depending on the home value.
Yeah.
If you're paying full retail costs to set up a reverse mortgage. Now, I did redo all my analysis and found that the benefits exceed the costs. So the answer to that question would be yes. If you're really intending to stay in the home,
right,
it can be worthwhile to go ahead and set up the line of credit. Although I do also recognize the sticker shock on those upfront costs make that psychologically a lot more challenging than when you could do it for $125.
Right. You could do it for $125 back in the day. Jeez, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Ooh,
that's because they not charging an origination fee and then crediting. The only thing the lender couldn't credit was you have to go through a mandatory counseling session,
right?
And that cost $125. So that's basically the one thing. If you got this deal, that was the one thing you had to pay. But that doesn't exist anymore.
And these loans, they can't be, unlike a HELOC, which happened to me as well, with USA, still ticks me off to this day, man. But they can't they can't cut you out once you're in there. I mean, so once you have the reverse mortgage line of credit, they can't later on say, hey, Wade, sorry, it sucks to be you, but the markets are going down, so we're going to call this loan back or something like that.
Right, yeah. So you are paying insurance premiums to the federal government, and one of the protections your insurance is supporting is, right, you have guaranteed access to the line of credit. It can't be called or frozen or anything like that.
I just want to add too, is that just these two folks who I know asked about doing it now or later. It's also based on your home value. So if you do it later, inherently your fees are going to be higher, assuming your home value increases. So it was is it 2% weight of the fair market, not the loan amount, the line amount, but the actual appraised amount. Is that what it is, Wade? 2% of the appraised amount?
Yeah, the initial mortgage premium, it's now 2% of the appraised home value up to the lending limit, which I forget the exact number, although it's on it changes every year. It's like in the lower 700,000.
Right. Yeah. So if you have a $200,000 home, you know for a fact that 4,000 of that you're going to pay part of your closing costs will be that 4,000, 2% on the $200,000 home. If you expect your home to increase to 300,000 in 5 years, now it's going to be $6,000 on top, to include on the other closing costs, simply because it's based on your fair market value, which again is what I learned old Wade's book there. So let's see, Wade, just bear me. So my man Sergio, who's a big advocate in California on reverse mortgages as well, and he always pipes in positive whenever I'm doing one of these videos. He says, my question for Wade, this isn't really about reverse mortgages. He asks about the pros and cons of the rising equity glide path, 8 to 10 years in the cash bucket. So it sounds like he's kind of thinking about with the KITSA stuff, you know what I'm saying? If you have, maybe a lower exposure to I can't remember how it goes, but does that make sense what Sergio's asking here, Wade?
Yeah, it was KITSA and I were co-authors on that.
I think both y'all did that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was more of a mathematical interesting thing. Was instead of like having a fixed asset allocation retirement or even continuing it to decrease, which already a number of people had figured out, a decreasing stock allocation throughout retirement works much worse than a fixed stock allocation throughout retirement. Well, we just took that a step further and found actually an increasing stock allocation throughout retirement can work as a risk management strategy versus just having the higher stock allocation throughout the whole retirement. And it's really because it helps to manage sequence risk, that in the early years, when you're the most vulnerable to market volatility, you have a lower stock allocation. And then kind of the worst case scenario people face is they get bad market returns in early retirement and markets recover later in retirement. And that's the exact scenario where a rising equity glide path would help to manage that risk for you. So I thought it was just an interesting idea. The media really picked up on it because it is so counterintuitive. And in terms of how people, I've come across a lot of people that are interested in using it. I think there is just behavioral concerns, that this idea that as you get older, you increase your stock allocation. But also part of what led us to do this anyway. And the way I like to think about asset allocation, it's not just for your portfolio, but for all of your household assets.
Yeah.
And so if you have Social Security, I think of that as a bond. And as you get older, the value of your remaining Social Security decreases. If you have any annuities, their value decreases as you age, like in terms of the present value of the guaranteed income. So you might naturally just have a rising equity glide path if you're spending conservatively and you keep a fixed stock allocation in your portfolio and your portfolio is not declining too quickly. You might really be increasing your stock allocation as a percentage of all your overall assets. And so that's how I think a lot of people end up doing a rising equity glide path, even if they don't realize it. But it's the same sort of concept. Stocks become a bigger percentage of your overall wealth as you age.
Well, especially as, again, the 10 years at 1 3/4. Hey, give us some background on your experience in Japan, given now I think about it, like, my economics was always, Milton Friedman, just inflation's everywhere and everywhere, a monetary issue. And yet, here we got helicopter Ben and we don't have inflation. And the same could be said about Japan. No, wait, you have 10 years experience of witnessing that firsthand, Japan, the negative interest rates and all that stuff. So just because the government has all this debt, it just seems to me that inherently we don't necessarily have inflationary issues coming down the pike anytime soon, and thus we don't necessarily have interest rates going up. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Japan's been dealing with that now for 30 years.
It's crazy, right? There's no inflation there, and yet they have debt to GDP like 200% or something like that.
Right. So part of, they have a huge debt to GDP ratio, but a lot of that is one government agency owes another government agency.
Yeah.
And I think if you kind of account for netting out all the debt owed by one agency to another, their debt ratio isn't as extreme as it sounds. But yeah, you definitely would expect at some point lenders, and also, Japan's a different case. A lot of these companies and the government agencies feel obligated to make these loans or to buy the securities. So there's not as much potential for suddenly investors to change their mind and decide they're not going to hold Japanese debt anymore. Like their pension fund holds a lot of it as well, which we have in the U.S. with Social Security buying non-marketable U.S. government treasuries. But there is more potential for Japan to sustain that higher debt to GDP ratio than other countries might be able to pull off.
But that doesn't necessarily mean, though, I think a lot of people, and going back to the question here about interest rates, they inherently have to go up. And I just, I'm agnostic. I don't know anymore. I thought I knew everything, just like the Phillips curve, we got low unemployment, high inflation will come in, and we don't see that. I don't. Anyway, I think you had written out, I know you did, as a matter of fact, about the bond yields. We pretty much know what you're going to get if you invest in bonds and whatnot. It's like a 95% correlation or something like that. And there's just, I don't know. There's just no indication that inflation is going to hit. And thus, owning bonds even more in retirement is a very, very risky proposition because you're not even covering inflation, never mind taxes. So any thoughts on that, Wade? Look, you don't have to say don't own bonds. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the idea of 60-40 portfolio when the old days 40% was paying 6% on the 10-year treasury. Those days just seem Pollyannish now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Lower interest rates are going to lower the amount you can spend from the portfolio sustainably. And it's huge. It increases the cost of retirement because you have to use a lower spending rate. There's no 4% rule with bonds today. I was shocked because in July I was kind of on vacation and then got caught up on what happened to the interest rates. But the 30-year TIPS yield is back down to like 0.6% real, and a long-term rate out of TIPS is somewhere around 0.5% real. You can't sustain the 4% rule with inflation-adjusted bonds. It's just interest rates are so low, retirement becomes more expensive. That's why with that idea, like this brings back to the point about reverse mortgages. It's the one thing where lower interest rates don't hurt; they actually help reverse mortgage. Lower interest rates hurt everything else.
Well, they hurt everything else, and then the tax rates haven't gone down. I mean, I get it, if you're taking RMDs and whatnot, but you still have taxes. You still have to deal with the cost of living increase and all that. And I just, I find it. This is where I have a kind of dilemma. Ways I read your stuff, and 3.2% is now the new 4%. I think that's even before the where we are now. So let's just say 3% is the new 4%. Then I guess you can diversify and make it 3.5, whatever. But just the rules of thumb that we've kind of all latched onto just seem to be so far removed from reality anymore that it's almost like people are in fear. They don't know what to do. And that's why I think, bringing up the use of the equity in your home just inherently makes sense, because you have this pile of cash that you can't do anything with until you turn it to an asset, or you have this asset you can't do anything with until you turn it to cash. I don't get so many people not using that. When you ran numbers, Wade, on so you had the Stanford Center for Longevity. I forgot the name of the thing. In 2017, you, Tomlinson, and that professor up there, Vernon, you had it was like 150-page thing. I was reading that, and then I just had so much in there. I was like, I'm just going to ask Wade. When you incorporated the reverse mortgage, what was, and if you don't know off the top of your head, that's fine. What was the panacea for a retirement withdrawal rate incorporating the reverse mortgage? So if we use the 4% rule, and that's the safe withdrawal rate, and I've never liked the safe withdrawal rate because you have lots of other withdrawal rates you could use, and so you're kind of limiting your expense. But if we incorporate the reverse mortgage into that, given the environment that we're in now with interest rates, I mean, can people be looking at 5% initial withdrawal rate? I mean, anything you want to say to that, Wade, by chance?
For that research, that I usually remember my old research pretty well, but that one, it's been at least 3 years since.
Yeah.
I mean, not that specific report, but more generally, the idea. So the two general ways you might use a reverse mortgage to support spending, you could turn on the 10-year payment, which is kind of like an annuity, where you just, as long as you remain eligible for the loan, you continue to receive monthly payments, even if you lose up the full line of credit. Or what most of the early research was about was this coordinated strategy.
Yes, exactly.
Where you use the reverse mortgage as a buffer asset. And if the portfolio is down, rather than having to sell assets at a loss and locking in sequence risk, you temporarily draw from the reverse mortgage. And that can have a significant increase. You're introducing a new asset. So it's like you can use a higher withdrawal rate from your portfolio because you're not always spending from your portfolio. That's part of the explanation. But also really the synergy of helping to manage sequence risk.
Yes.
It can help to raise the distribution rate that still will support a particular spending level. And I don't have specific numbers on that.
No, right. But
yeah,
intuitively, you have
significant.
We have your stocks, you have your bonds, and you have your equity. I mean, so take whatever is going well and leave the other that's getting hammered. Just leave that be. You know what I'm saying? So you can inherently, you don't have to draw down an asset that's down 55% like we had in the Great Recession. Just intuitively it makes sense.
Yeah, I just ran. It was really interesting. This 4% rule, the kind of the standard. It was based on the 30 years from 1966 to 1995, where with a 50-50 portfolio, if you started with $1 million, you could take out $40,000 a year plus inflation and have zero left at the end. And I just looked at, well, what if you skipped one distribution? What would that do? And if you skip the distribution, there were big market downturns, I think, in 66 and 67 or 69.
73 and 74.
And then in the early, 73 and 74. And like if you just could skip one distribution, rather than having zero left at the end, you might
Yeah.
have most of your initial principal still intact at the end. And so that's how the idea of these buffer assets works. That, yeah, with the reverse mortgage, you're going to have a growing loan balance on that one distribution you took. But it's likely going to be the increased cost through the loan balance. If that's less than the synergies created to help preserve that portfolio and avoid having it get into that death spiral where the withdrawal rate just keeps getting pushed up towards 100%.
Yeah.
That's how you still have a bigger net legacy at the end. And that's generally how that sort of buffer asset approach works. And then that can allow you to use a much higher spending rate from the portfolio because you're coordinating and being able to get that synergistic benefit to your portfolio, not having to always take distributions when the market's down.
Well, I'm running a series called Retire on the Wellington Fund, and it's amazing to me how bad the 66 to 82 timeframe was. It's we all think the Great Depression. The Great Depression was nothing compared to that time frame. And if you can survive that time frame, you can almost. I mean, we don't know, like I said, the universe of unknowns. But man, that was not only the market not do much, but inflation was so dastardly. It was that has come full throttle to me the way to recognize how just dangerous inflation is. As an economist, do you have any concern? I mean, again, I'm kind of backtracking, going back to your experience in Japan, which didn't have any. But here, we're a different economy. We have immigration, all that. So we have new blood coming into the system, but at the same time, we do have still lower interest rates. Any concern about inflation? I mean, any concern about CAPE ratios? Anything that jump out at you? Say, these are the things that keep you up at night. That you're saying, inflation can eat us alive. Shiller's CAPE ratios are always high. They've been high for as long as we can remember. Bond yields are low. What kind of makes you stay awake at night? You say this could be a challenge for retirees.
Well, so the inflation issue, it's interesting how, in spite of everything going on, the markets still expect inflation to be low. You can just compare treasuries to tips, and the difference in yields is the best estimate we have about future inflation.
Yeah.
And it can be a 2% difference. So like the markets are expecting at most 2% inflation. If you're worried inflation's higher than that, put your bonds into tips because they provide a real yield, which is low, but plus whatever inflation is. And if inflation is high, you get higher returns, or it's not so much the returns as your spending. If your spending grows with inflation, tips are going to be able to protect your real spending level over time. So there's a pretty easy way to manage inflation risk for people concerned about it. It's to use tips instead of traditional bonds. And then stock market valuations are as high as they've ever been, and that suggests lower stock returns in the future. Not necessarily that investing in bonds is any better, but I think the solution there, to have a good retirement income plan, you look beyond just the investment portfolio. So this isn't a reason to sell off stocks, but if you can lock in your gains and use annuities as a way to help support lifetime income, and then if you still want to have those assets invested in stocks, the potential for like a variable annuity, that you have your investment still, but you would then have the income guarantee overlaying on that, where if something bad happens in the market and the contract value depletes, you still have a lifetime income protected through that. So that would be the way to think about worries about the stock market, but not necessarily wanting to leave the stock market entirely.
Yeah, you can't wait. I mean, you can't. I mean, where else are you going to go? Lock up your money in a 10-year treasury at 1.75. And one of my pet peeves, Wade, on the whole 4% rule and the whole retirement planning, generally speaking, retirement income plan is, the lack of talk about fees, which I find ticks me off, and then taxes too, because if you look at the fees added to the taxes, the 4% rule quickly is a lot lower. Or it's just, I wish financial planners would be more transparent if they're running scenarios using a 4%. I don't even care, Frank, what they're using, but to be transparent on the fees they're charging, because that is a detriment to the sustainability of the portfolio. And I I have a sneaky suspicion many financial planners exclude that when they're running retirement plans, and they can't, because if you're paying 1% of assets under management, that is coming out of the portfolio. You know what I'm saying? Jeez, frustrates me. Any thoughts on the CFP board study or controversy, Wade, with the CFP board theoretically hasn't policing up its own and allowing people with, I don't know. I know Kitts has written about that, and who else? Alan Roth has written about that. Any thoughts on your end?
Well, yeah, it's disappointing. I don't get as involved in that side of things. I'm not a CFP myself at this stage, but yeah, it's definitely disappointing how they had the huge marketing campaign where they really talk about how they use a higher standard than anyone else, and then they're not living up to the standard that they indicated.
I had a kind of chuckle. We use a higher standard, and we validate these people. And oh, wait, actually, maybe not. Wait, just a couple more. You got a couple more minutes? You up against it?
I'm good.
All right, just a couple more. So
at the top of the hour.
Yeah, I've got about 3 or 4 emails on your paper that just came out. I guess CNBC talked about the viability of the spend safely and retirement strategy. Again, you, Thomason, and Steve Vernon. And one thing I wanted to point out real quick, Wade, is that in summary, this direct quote, in summary, this spend safely and retirement system, I guess, scorecard, includes 2 key steps: optimize expected Social Security benefits through a careful delay strategy. And this is a quote, Wade. In this case, many middle-income retirees may have all the guaranteed lifetime income they need. The reason I'm pointing that out, because I literally just published my 4th book, which says you can retire on Social Security. I don't know why everyone is damning Social Security. I mean, I get it, it's a Ponzi scheme. I get that, but that doesn't inherently mean it's bad. What's your thoughts on the sustainability of Social Security? The trustees report. People not using Social Security in their planning analysis and all that. I mean, because Social Security, let's just be honest, it's never going to be privatized. Bush thought he was going to spend his personal capital on it, his political capital. That's not going anywhere. We got this new Social Security 2100 Act, which I have some problems with, but by and large, Social Security is a big deal. And what's your thoughts on its sustainability?
Well, at some point, reforms are going to be needed, but usually those reforms are going to impact younger people more than older people. So anyone close to Social Security claiming age is probably going to be grandfathered in and not see any big cuts to their benefits. The one, and that would apply really to also lower class and middle class. The one potential reform that could impact wealthier people is a discussion about means testing.
Yes,
where they decide if your income or wealth are too high, you don't get any Social Security benefit. That's something that wouldn't affect the lower to middle class as much as it could affect wealthier individuals. But otherwise, I think people close to retirement, for the most part, can be comfortable. They'll get Social Security. And it's not like Social Security would disappear. Those projections are about how in the early 2030s, the trust fund depletes, and then incoming new revenues are only enough to cover in the neighborhood of 75% of the benefits that are presently legislated to be given. So if nothing at all happens, there'd have to be this across the board, like 25% benefit reduction. But what happened in 1983 was the same thing. They wait until the last possible second, and then they introduced reforms.
Well, they did that with the Bush tax cut sunsetting. Remember that in the end of 2011, or with Boehner and Obama. Literally, I think it was literally the last day, December 31st, where they got together and they made those permanent. To the chagrin of the anti-Obamaites and the chagrin of the anti-Republicanites, they actually met halfway. It was nuts and actually worked, and we're all here. We're all better off for it. Bipartisanship actually worked to some regard. So. All right, so you're on record saying you're not worried that no, I don't want to say that. You're on record saying if you're close to retirement, you probably are going to get Social Security. Is that a fair statement there, Wade? You would agree with me?
Yeah, and the only caveat is just I never thought, like, means testing is, since Social Security was created in the 1930s, it was not meant to be a welfare program. There was not meant to be any stigma. You contributed, and it's like a pension that you get.
Right.
And so means testing is really kind of counter to the entire idea of Social Security. And I never thought we'd see it, but in this political environment anymore, nothing can be considered sacred or so we could have means testing, and that would be the one kind of reform that could impact wealthier individuals. But otherwise, I think
incorporates some of that. Yeah. The Social Security 2100 Act, it kind of has means testing where they're going to increase if they're going to make this fourth bend point if memory serves, and the fourth one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's stealthy ways to create means testing.
Yeah, exactly.
And the whole idea of taxing Social Security benefits.
Because you've asked. Go ahead.
Well, taxing Social Security benefits was a sneaky way to means test, for one thing.
It's nuts. So, if you ask anybody about the bend points and the inflation adjust, non-inflation adjust on Social Security tax, all that, they'll never say they tax it, but yet they certainly have. That's for sure. But any thoughts? We'll let you get out of here on this. Again, I've just received 3 emails on this, at least on the Society of Actuaries, thing that you guys did. And I don't know if you recall it off the top of your head, but it's a recently published thing. It's 100 and something pages here. But any thoughts on that report on spend safely and retirement strategy? If you're talking to grandma who's about ready to retire, and she says, "Wade, tell me what I should do for retirement," what would be the one thing from this report that you guys ran that said this is what you should be thinking about, grandma, or 2 things or 3 things? I don't care, but just anything jump out to you primarily from this report.
Well, yeah, so it's kind of this floor and upside idea where you're going to lock in a floor with Social Security. And so you just want to be smart about claiming Social Security. And that can often mean delaying so that you get those delay credits. Because all that was said in 1983 when interest rates were a lot higher and when people weren't living as long. It's now much in your favor that you're going to benefit from delaying Social Security. So you build your floor that way. And then the other part of it is you use the RMD rules to decide how much you're going to spend every year. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that you're comfortable investing aggressively and using the RMDs, it leads to, this is meant to be more your discretionary spending, but that's the more academically efficient way to spend down your remaining portfolio over your lifetime.
Interesting. I call that the fun in food. Actually, a client just told me that yesterday, just off the top of her head. She goes, I use that discretion. We'll say that's our fun in food money. So that's actually a good way to look at it. So use the RMD tables. We'll say 3.7% at 70 and 3.85 or whatever it is at 80 and so on and so on. On top of delaying Social Security is a primo strategy from what you guys' research has found.
Yeah, that is. So it leads, your spending is going to fluctuate over time. That 4% rule it's kind of the opposite. It's where your spending never changes, but you might spend down your portfolio that way because you don't really pay attention to the withdrawal rate anymore. The RMD rules is sort of the opposite. It's an increasing withdrawal rate as you age because your time horizon gets shorter. So you can spend an increasing percentage of what's left. And they are set conservatively. They assume a couple where one spouse is 10 years younger, and they assume 0% returns on an investment portfolio, but it's designed to spend down your assets over time. And so just use those same rates to decide a reasonable spending budget each year. It's a pretty straightforward way to go about deciding on a discretionary spending that should not be, unless there's really bad markets, should not really decrease too much over time.
Well, if there's bad markets, tap any reverse mortgage to square this circle. That's the whole point.
Well, you could do that. You could add in the reverse mortgage as the buffer asset, and then spend from the reverse mortgage in the years that the market's down, and that would really then the RMD rules are probably really getting too conservative because it's back to that point that you could use a higher rate.
I always subscribe to the keep it simple, stupid saying, Wade, and if I can say, okay, I can spend 5% at my retirement, I delay Social Security, the markets get killed like 73, 74, whatnot, I take it from reverse mortgage, probably have a pretty good chance of being okay. We'll never be able to prove that because we can't prove the future, but at the end of the day, that's probably going to work just fine. And obviously you got to take into consider the risk of health or the risk of freaking a bomb dropping off your house and all that. But you can only do so much. That's ultimately, Wade, what I think. I just tell folks, I say, look, you can freaking analyze this, paralysis by analysis until you're blue in the face, but you don't know, and that's going back to your research of all the international markets. If we're just using this tiny subset of the U.S. market, and then we have the Bolsheviks take over or whatever it is, you know what I'm saying? We have Pinochet. The list goes on and on and on for what could happen. At the end of the day, you just got to make a decision and say, this is what I'm going to do, and prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And that's all retirees can do. But they should do it with a round or sound financial plan for sure. Any last words, Wade? Man, I tell you, this is, like I said, a true pleasure for me, a privilege to get you on here. Any thoughts for the crew here that's listening? I'm going to put links to the show notes to your book again. I put links to all the studies you've done, various things from advisor perspectives. But anything that jumps out at you, sir?
I think we covered it all. So yeah, thanks for having me on, and I hope everyone just has a chance to enjoy a great retirement. So Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Wade. Yeah, hey, hang tight for just a second while I hang up here, but don't hang up yet, Wade. I'm just going to hit unrecord. Hold on just a second.